Evelyn Hartwell picked up the serving tray with both hands and walked straight into the middle of her sister's wedding. Not as a guest, not as family, as the woman nobody thought to thank. 60 people were eating food she had bought, sitting under ribbons she had hung, drinking wine she had paid for, and not one of them knew her name. She had built this entire day from nothing, and they handed her an apron. If you've ever given everything you had and been handed more work instead of gratitude, this story was made for you. Subscribe, stay until the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Evelyn was already on her second tray when the bride started crying happy tears across the lawn. She did not stop moving. She never stopped moving. That was the thing about Evelyn Hartwell that her family had counted on for 7 years, not her intelligence, though she had more of it than anyone in the county gave her credit for. Not her patience, though she had burned through enough of it to fuel a lesser woman straight into the ground. What they counted on, what they had always counted on, was the simple and devastating fact that Evelyn would not stop. She would keep going. She would handle it. She would find a way. And she always did. She had been awake since 4 o'clock that morning. Not because someone asked her to be, because someone had to be. The caterers were arriving at 6. The florist's boy had a habit of being 20 minutes late, which meant someone needed to be there at 5:40 to receive the flowers and make certain they were arranged before the heat got to them. The linen needed pressing a second time. The morning dew had gotten to it overnight, which Evelyn had anticipated 3 days before and mentioned to her mother, who had nodded and promptly forgotten, so Evelyn pressed the linen herself. At 4:30 in the morning, in the kitchen by lamplight, while the rest of the house slept, her mother had handed her a list the night before. 14 items, written in Beatrice Hartwell's careful, unhurried script, the handwriting of a woman who had never once in her life had to rush for anything, because there was always someone else doing the rushing on her behalf. Evelyn read the list once, folded it, put it in her pocket. By 8 o'clock, every item was done. She was standing at the edge of the lawn in her rose-colored silk dress, the one Caroline had sent to her room 3 days prior, with a small card tucked inside. The card said, "You will look beautiful today, Evie. Please help me make everything perfect." Evelyn had read it twice. Then she put it in the same drawer where she kept every other small thing her family gave her, instead of gratitude. And she went downstairs to start the list. The guests arrived at 10:30. Evelyn was already on her feet, directing the caterer's staff with the quiet precision of someone who had been managing complicated situations for long enough that it no longer required any visible effort. She pointed. People moved. She said a thing once and did not need to say it again. There was something in her bearing, not arrogance. Nothing so obvious as that, just a settled, unshakable sense of where everything was supposed to be and why. Then one of the caterer's boys knocked a full tray of glasses off the edge of a table. The sound split the air like a gunshot. Beatrice materialized out of nowhere and descended on the boy the way weather descends, fast and without warning. The boy went to his knees, picking up glass, apologizing in a thin, mortified voice, while Beatrice stood over him with her arms crossed and her expression doing the particular thing it did when someone had failed to meet the standard she had set in her own mind without ever communicating it to anyone else. And while all of that was happening, while every eye on that side of the lawn swung toward the noise and the drama, no one was bringing out the second course. Evelyn watched the empty tables for approximately 30 seconds. Then she picked up a tray. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she'd set it down the moment the boy recovered. She was still carrying trays 90 minutes later. Theodore Whitmore arrived at 11. And the first thing he did was make every woman near the garden gate forget what they'd been saying to each other. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in the way that serious men sometimes are, like the handsomeness was incidental. Something that happened alongside the rest of him, rather than the point of him. He was tall, dark coat despite the heat, Jia said in the expression of a man who had committed to being somewhere and was seeing it through on principle. He came alone. That was what the women were whispering about. Theodore Whitmore, attending a social function. Theodore Whitmore. Without an escort. Theodore Whitmore, who had turned down 3 dinner invitations from the Mercer family alone this spring. Walking up the Hartwell Drive like he'd decided at the last minute and hadn't entirely reconsidered. He shook the hand of the first cousin who rushed over to greet him. Said something brief that made the cousin laugh nervously. And moved toward the second row of tables. He sat down. And then he started watching. That was the thing about Theodore that most people never noticed. Because most people were too busy noticing his money or his land or the particular way a room arranged itself around him without meaning to. He watched, carefully, continuously. The way a man watches when he's learned through experience that the most important information in any given situation is almost never the information that announces itself. He noticed the flowers first, then the linen, then the quality of the food being served and the quantity of it, which was considerably above what he would have expected from a family he knew, from 3 years of business dealings in this county, to be in significant financial trouble. He did the math. Then he looked across the lawn and found the woman in the rose dress. She was moving between tables at the particular pace of someone who was efficient, without appearing hurried, which is a genuinely difficult thing to manage, and most people never figure out. Her hair was auburn, pinned up in the fashion of the day. A few strands loose at her temples, not from carelessness, Theodore decided, but from the fact that she'd been in continuous motion since well before he arrived, and even the most carefully pinned hair has its limits. He watched a man reach past her for his wineglass without looking at her. He watched a woman speak to her in the tone one uses for household staff, not unkind, not cruel, just entirely absent of curiosity about who she was or what she might be thinking. He watched her absorb both of these things without reaction. Not because she hadn't noticed, because she had learned, somewhere along the way, that reacting was a luxury she couldn't afford. Theodore set down his glass. "Excuse me," he said, turning to the man seated beside him, someone's cousin. He thought, from Albemarle County, the woman in the rose dress. "Do you know who she is?" The man glanced over. "Oh, that's the Hartwell girl, the Evelyn. She's family." The cousin reached for a bread roll. "Never married. Useful sort, though, always helping out." Theodore looked back at Evelyn. She was across the lawn now, speaking quietly to one of the kitchen girls who looked close to tears. Evelyn said 3 things. The girl straightened. The panic left her face. She nodded and went back inside. Useful, Theodore thought. Always helping out. He knew exactly what those words were doing. He knew what they were being used to avoid saying. Beatrice Hartwell found her way to his elbow 20 minutes later, which was the amount of time it took her to complete her circuit of guests, important enough to require her personal attention. "Mr. Whitmore," her smile arrived on cue, warm and precise. "We are so honored, Mrs. Hartwell," he stood briefly. "A beautiful celebration, isn't it?" She surveyed the lawn with the satisfaction of a general reviewing a victory. "Caroline looks radiant. Is a wonderful young man. We are very fortunate. You've arranged everything remarkably well," Theodore said. "The flowers, the linen, the food, all of it. One does what one can for one's children." She clasped her hands together. He let a beat pass. "Who managed the arrangements?" A small pause. Small enough that a less attentive person would have missed it entirely. "Oh, it was a family effort," Beatrice said smoothly. "We all contributed in our way." Theodore looked across the lawn to where Evelyn was redirecting one of the servers who'd gotten turned around. "Your daughter is working very hard today." Beatrice followed his gaze. The satisfaction in her face softened into something adjacent to mild inconvenience. "Evelyn does enjoy being useful," she said, with the particular fondness people use when they're describing someone else's limitation as a virtue. "It's simply her nature. She would be at a loss without something to organize." Theodore said. Beatrice moved on. Theodore watched her go. Then he looked back across the lawn to where Evelyn Hartwell had just taken a full tray from a boy who clearly couldn't manage it, taken it without being asked, without a word, and was now carrying it herself, and something went quiet and decided in him. He stood up. She did not hear him coming. She had her back to the lawn, speaking in a low voice to one of the kitchen staff about the timing on the dessert course. When she became aware of someone standing behind her, not from sound exactly, but from the shift in the air, the particular quality of stillness that gathers around a person who is waiting with patience and without apology. She turned. He was taller than she'd registered from across the lawn. Up close, the seriousness of his face was more complicated, not cold. She decided. Just honest. The face of a man who had stopped performing emotions he didn't feel. "Miss Hartwell," he said. She tilted her head slightly. Professional. Contained. Giving him nothing he hadn't earned. He looked at her for a moment, just looked, and then, without a word of explanation, without preamble of any kind, he turned to the nearest chair at the nearest guest table. And he pulled it out. "Sit down." She stared at him. The conversation nearest them stopped first, then the next table. It spread outward the way silence always does when something has happened that no one expected, fast. And all at once, until 60 people were either looking directly at them or very deliberately not looking. Which amounted to the same thing. 60 people who had watched this woman carry their wine and pour their water and redirect their servers for the past 2 hours. 6 people watching a man pull out a chair for her. Caroline, across the lawn, went absolutely still. Her new husband leaned over and said something in her ear. She did not respond. Beatrice, near the garden gate, turned and saw, and for one unguarded second, something moved across her face that was not quite anger and not quite shame, but lived somewhere uncomfortably between them. "I'm fine, sir," Evelyn said. Her voice came out steady. She was grateful for that. "Thank you. I didn't ask how you were," Theodore said. "I have things to Miss Hartwell." He said her name the way people say things they mean. "Quiet, no performance in it, sit down." She looked at him. Not the way a woman looks at a man who is rescuing her. Not with relief, not with gratitude, not with any of the softness that the moment might have invited. She looked at him the way a person looks at an unknown thing they have encountered on a familiar road, carefully, from a slight distance, trying to determine its nature before committing to any reaction. "Who are she?" asked. "Theodore Whitmore." He held the chair. His arm did not waver. "I'm a neighbor of your family's. I have attended 3 social gatherings in the past year, all 3 of which I would have preferred to avoid. I have never in my life pulled out a chair for a person I did not know." A pause. "Sit down." Something moved in her face, something she couldn't stop in time. Not quite a smile, something older and more complicated than a smile. The expression of a person who has just been surprised by something genuine when they had thoroughly stopped expecting it. She sat, the silence held for 3 more seconds. Then conversation erupted back across the lawn, all at once, loud. Overlapping, the sound of 60 people deciding simultaneously to pretend they'd been talking about something else this whole time. Theodore sat in the chair beside her. He picked up his glass from the nearby table before one of the servers could collect it. And he settled into the chair with the air of a man who had decided to be here and was comfortable with that decision. "You've been on your feet since before dawn," he said. "You arrived at 11. I know when I arrived." He glanced at her sideways. The linen on those far tables was pressed twice. The flowers on the east side were arranged before the dew dried. "And you know exactly where everything is on this lawn without looking." He set down his glass. "You built all of this." She kept her eyes forward. "That's a private matter." "It is," he agreed. "You don't have to confirm it." Silence. "I paid for it," she said, "if that's what you're asking." She lifted her chin. Just slightly. The gesture of a woman deciding to claim something she was owed. Every last piece. He nodded slowly, like a man turning something over and finding it exactly as heavy as he expected. How long have you been managing your family's finances? She looked at him sharply. 7 years, he said before she could answer. Since your father's business collapsed. I know because I deal in this county's commerce, and a debt that size leaves a mark. What I'm asking is whether anyone in your family has ever acknowledged what that cost you. The question landed the way certain questions do. Not with force, with weight. The kind that doesn't arrive all at once but keeps settling. Layer by layer, until a person understands the full dimension of what's been asked of them. Evelyn Hartwell looked at Theodore Whitmore, and for the first time all day, for the first time, she suspected, in years her face showed what it was actually carrying. Not tears, not anger, something quieter and more enduring than either of those things. The specific exhaustion of a woman who had been holding everything up for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to simply put something down. No, she said. No one has. He said nothing. Across the lawn, a fiddle found its note. The first music of the afternoon drifted out over the tables. Caroline was laughing again, luminous in white, her new husband's hand at her back. She's not a bad person, Evelyn said. She didn't know why she said it. My sister, I believe you. She was just raised to believe that what I did was expected. Natural, she stopped. Normal. A lot of people are raised that way, Theodore said. That doesn't make it right. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. He turned toward her then. Fully. The way a person turns when they are about to say something they have been deciding whether to say. Miss Hartwell, I have a sister, Eleanor. She did for my family what you've done for yours, managed accounts. Handled creditors, kept everything standing while my father's health declined. And when it was over, when the estate was saved, 3 separate aunts congratulated me on handling everything so well. Evelyn looked at him. I did not correct them, he said. The words came out flat. Not performing regret, just honest. In the way of a man who has carried something long enough that he's past pretending it weighs nothing. I didn't correct them, he said again, and Eleanor never said a word. Because Eleanor never said a word, that was just who she was. He paused. I have regretted it every year since. Evelyn studied him. She had enough practice reading people. It was one of the skills that made her extraordinary at what she did. And one of the reasons she was never entirely comfortable. Because she almost always knew more about what people were feeling than they intended to show her, and what she read in Theodore Whitmore's face right now was not performance. It was not charm, it was not strategy, it was a man who meant exactly what he said. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully, why are you telling me this? Because I recognized something when I watched you through noon, he said. And I decided not to be the kind of man who recognizes something and keeps walking. She was quiet. The music played. The wedding moved around them like weather warm and present, and entirely indifferent to the 2 people sitting still at the edge of it. What happens when this is over? Theodore asked. When the guests leave and the linen is folded and Caroline is gone on her honeymoon. What happens to you? The question felt strange in a way Evelyn couldn't immediately account for. Not because it was complicated, because no one had ever asked it. What happens to you? Not what are your plans, not what do you intend, but the simpler and somehow more exact version of the same concern. I go home, she said, and then I open the ledger books and calculate what this cost and figure out what comes next. Alone. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. The late afternoon light was doing something particular to the lawn, making everything look golden and temporary and slightly more significant than it probably was. You deserve better than that, he said. I want you to know someone said it. Even if it's a stranger, even if it doesn't change a single thing tonight. Evelyn Hartwell looked at Theodore Whitmore. And something happened in her chest that she had not felt in so long she barely recognized it, something small and fragile and entirely unwelcome in its timing. Because she could not afford it, she had never been able to afford it. The feeling of being seen, not managed. Not handled. She looked away before he could read it on her face. Thank you, she said quietly. Mr. Whitmore. He did not say you're welcome. He just sat beside her in the last of the afternoon sun, in the middle of the wedding she had built with her own hands. And he did not ask her to move. And for the first time in 7 years, Evelyn Hartwell did not. The wedding ended the way all weddings end, with noise. And then with silence. And then with the particular kind of exhaustion that settles over a place after a crowd has left it. By 7 o'clock the guests were gone. The caterers were packing their things. The musicians had already loaded their fiddles into a wagon and disappeared down the drive. And Evelyn was folding linen, not because anyone asked her to. Because someone had to, and the caterers' boys were already overwhelmed with the dishes. And the linen was expensive. She had paid for it herself, and knew exactly what it cost, and if it wasn't folded properly tonight, it would crease wrong and be ruined by morning. So she folded. She had been in motion for 15 hours. She did not think about Theodore Whitmore. She thought about the linen. She thought about the stack of folded pieces growing beside her on the table, and the number of pieces remaining, and the most efficient order in which to complete the task. She thought about the ledger book waiting for her in her room upstairs. The column of numbers she would need to add by candlelight before she slept, because she would not sleep until she knew exactly where she stood. She did not think about what he had said. She did not think about the feeling in her chest when he said it. She folded another piece of linen. Evelyn. She did not turn around. She knew her mother's voice, the way you know a sound that has followed you for your entire life, not because it comforted you, but because you had learned very early to hear it coming. Yes, Mama. What on earth were you thinking? She set down the linen. Turned. I'm not certain which part you're referring to. Beatrice Hartwell stood in the middle of the empty lawn, with her arms crossed and her expression arranged into the configuration that meant she was angry and had chosen to process that anger as injury. You sat down. In the middle of Caroline's wedding. At a guest table. With Theodore Whitmore. I did. People were looking. Yes, Evelyn. Beatrice's voice dropped to the register she used when she wanted something to sound like a private conversation. Do you have any idea who that man is? What people will... The way it looked. The way it looked, Evelyn said carefully, was that a man offered me a chair and I sat in it. You were supposed to be helping. I had been helping for 15 hours. Mama, don't use that tone with me. I'm not using a tone. I'm using arithmetic. Beatrice stared at her. In 27 years of raising Evelyn, she had learned to recognize the particular quality of her daughter's stillness, the way Evelyn went very quiet and very precise when she was close to something she would not back down from. Most of the time, Beatrice pressed anyway, because most of the time, Evelyn backed down regardless. Tonight felt different. I just don't understand why you would do something so conspicuous, Beatrice said. Today of all days, Caroline's wedding day. Caroline's wedding day was lovely, Evelyn said. I made certain of it. The words landed between them. Beatrice heard them. She heard exactly what they meant and what they were not quite saying. She opened her mouth, closed it. Good night. Mama, Evelyn said. She picked up the linen. I'll finish this and then I'll go over the accounts. We'll have the final cost tallied by morning. She turned back to the table and continued folding. Her mother stood behind her for a long moment. Then her footsteps crossed the lawn and went up the porch steps and into the house. Evelyn folded the last piece of linen, set it on the stack, pressed her hands flat against the table surface. She breathed. In the sudden complete quiet of the empty lawn, with the lanterns burning low and the night insects starting up their noise in the grass, she let herself feel for exactly 30 seconds how tired she was. 30 seconds. Then she picked up the stack of linen and carried it inside. She was at the ledger by 9 o'clock. The numbers were not good. They had not been good for 3 years. But there was a difference between numbers that were difficult and numbers that were becoming critical. And what she was looking at tonight was edging toward critical in a way that was going to require a decision she had been putting off for 6 months. The plantation had land. 80 acres of good Virginia farmland that her father had owned free and clear before his business investments turned bad. The land itself was solvent. What was bleeding them was the house, the maintenance of it. The staffing that her mother refused to reduce, because reducing the household staff would signal to the county that the Hartwells were struggling. And signaling struggle was, in Beatrice's accounting, a worse catastrophe than the actual financial crisis it represented. Evelyn had raised this conversation 4 times. 4 times her mother had changed the subject. She looked at the column of numbers, and then she looked at the wedding expenses she was adding to the right-hand column. And she did the calculation that she had been doing in the back of her mind for 3 months without letting herself finish it. At the current rate, they had 14 months. 14 months before the reserves were gone and the choices became impossible ones. She set down her pen. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She sat like that for a moment in the quiet of her room. In the house her family was slowly sinking inside of. And she thought about what Theodore Whitmore had said. "You deserve better than that. I want you to know some said it." She had not allowed herself to think about it for the last 4 hours. She allowed herself to think about it now, briefly, in the privacy of her own room, where no one could see what it did to her face. Then she picked up her pen and kept working. The knock came at 9:30 the next morning. Evelyn was in the kitchen going through the household accounts when Dora, their housekeeper, who was one of 3 remaining staff, and whom Evelyn had been quietly supplementing out of her own earnings for the past year to keep from having to let her go, appeared in the doorway with the particular expression she wore when something unexpected had happened. "There's a man at the door, Miss Evelyn," Doris said. "Who is it?" "Says his name is Whitmore." Evelyn set down her pen. She was silent for a long moment. "Tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes," she said. She went to the small mirror in the hallway, looked at herself briefly, decided there was nothing to be done about her appearance that wouldn't take longer than 5 minutes, and went to the front door. Theodore Whitmore was standing on the porch with his hat in his hand. He had the look of a man who had gotten up early and ridden some distance and was not bothered by either of those facts. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "Miss Hartwell." He looked at her directly. Not at her dress or her hair or any of the other things people usually looked at when they were assessing whether a woman was presentable. He looked at her face. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," she said. "But come in." He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before it fully formed. She led him to the front parlor, which was the room they used for guests they needed to impress, and which consequently felt, to Evelyn, entirely disconnected from anything real. She sat across from him and folded her hands in her lap and waited. "I want to offer you a position," he said. She blinked. Whatever she had expected him to say, it was not that. "I beg your pardon?" he said. "Managing the accounts for Whitmore land. I have 1,100 acres across 3 properties in this county. I have a man who handles the day-to-day operations, but no one with the financial acumen to manage the books properly. The last person I trusted with them made errors that cost me considerably more than his salary." He paused. "I watched you yesterday for 6 hours. I don't make offers lightly." Evelyn stared at him. "You're offering me work," she said. "Yes. You came here the morning after my sister's wedding to offer me employment." "I came here the morning after your sister's wedding because I spent last night calculating what I should have done differently over the past 3 years with my accounts, and the answer involved finding someone who actually knew what they were doing." He held her gaze. "That's you. You don't know anything about my work. I know you managed a failing estate for 7 years and kept it standing. I know you planned and executed an event that would have cost 3 times what you paid if a less capable person had organized it. I know that when a problem appeared yesterday, you solved it before anyone else had finished identifying it." He paused. "That's sufficient." Evelyn was quiet. She was doing the calculation. She could feel it happening, the way it always happened automatically, before she had consciously decided to do it. What the income would mean for the household. how many months it would buy, whether 14 months could become something more manageable. Then she stopped herself. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "I told you. I need someone capable. There are capable men in this county who would take your offer without requiring you to explain yourself." "Yes," he said. "There are. Then why me?" The question sat in the room between them. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because of Eleanor," he said finally. "Because my sister spent 10 years managing accounts for our family and died without anyone outside that house knowing her name or her work. Because I sat at that wedding yesterday and watched the same thing happening to someone else, and I decided I was not going to be the kind of man who watches that happen twice." He looked at her steadily. "And because you are clearly better at this than anyone I have paid to do it." Evelyn looked at him. She was 27 years old. She had been managing money and accounts and people and crises since she was 20. And in all that time, not one person outside the walls of this house had ever looked at what she did and called it what it actually was. Skill, work, something of value. "The position would require me to come to your estate," she said. 3 days a week. You would have full access to the books and the authority to make financial decisions within boundaries we'd agree on in advance. And compensation, above the county rate, he said. "Whatever you're currently earning, I'll exceed it." She almost said, "I'm not currently earning anything." She stopped herself in time. "I'll need to think about it, of course. And I'll need to speak with my mother." Something moved in his expression. Will she object? Evelyn thought about her mother. About the look on Beatrice's face last night when she came out to the lawn. About the 14 months left in the reserves. "She'll object to everything about it," Evelyn said. "She'll agree anyway." Beatrice objected to everything about it. She objected to the impropriety. She objected to the appearance. She objected to the fact that Evelyn would be working in the home of an unmarried man, which she said 3 times in different configurations, as though one of the configurations might finally land with sufficient force to conclude the argument. Evelyn waited. She had learned years ago that the most effective response to her mother's objections was patience. Not silence. Silence read as defiance. The specific, quiet, immovable patience of a woman who had already made her decision and was simply providing her mother the time to arrive at the same conclusion through her own route. "This family does not take employment from others," Beatrice said. "This family," Evelyn's, carefully, "is 14 months from insolvency." The room went very quiet. Beatrice stared at her. That she stopped. "That is an exaggeration. Would you like to look at the ledger?" "Evelyn, I've been over it 4 times, Evelyn said. "The numbers don't change between readings, Mama. They are what they are." She kept her voice level. She had learned that level was the only register her mother could hear facts in. "Mr. Whitmore's offer would stabilize our situations considerably. It would buy us time to make the other decisions that need to be made about the estate." "What other decisions?" "The staffing decisions. The maintenance decisions. The decisions I have been trying to raise with you for 6 months." Beatrice set down her teacup with a small, sharp sound. "You are talking about reducing this household." "I am talking about surviving," Evelyn said. "Which requires adjustments." Her mother stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the front drive with her arms crossed over her chest. And Evelyn recognized the posture. It was the posture Beatrice used when she was losing an argument she wasn't prepared to lose and needed a moment to reorganize. "People will talk," her mother said finally. "People talked yesterday when Theodore Whitmore pulled out a chair for me," Evelyn said. "We survived that too. Longer. He is a serious man," Beatrice said. Not quite conceding. "He is, and the terms are respectable. Above county rate. 3 days a week. Full authority over financial decisions within agreed parameters." Her mother turned from the window. Something had shifted in her face, the part of her that was. Underneath everything, a woman who had run her own household and knew what running something required. "You will be careful," Beatrice said. "I'm always careful." "Mama," her mother's voice changed, went quieter. "I mean with yourself." Evelyn looked at her. And for a moment, just a moment, she saw something in her mother's face that had no performance in it at all. Something that might have been, if you were generous, the beginning of understanding. Then it was gone. "I know what I'm doing," Evelyn said. She arrived at the Whitmore estate on a Tuesday. The house was larger than she expected and considerably less organized than a property its size should have been. She could see it the moment she walked into the study where the accounts were kept. Not disaster. Exactly, but the particular kind of managed disorder that happens when capable people are working without a coherent system and don't know what they don't know. 3 separate ledger books that should have been one. Accounts entered in 2 different hands with 2 different conventions. A column of expenditures that had been started and abandoned midway through. The reasoning visible but the execution incomplete. She looked at it all for about 4 minutes. Then she sat down and started working. Henry Marsh, the man who managed the day-to-day operations of the estate, found her there an hour later. He was a broad, weathered man of about 50 who had the bearing of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in any given room. He stood in the doorway of the study and looked at her, at the ledger books she'd reorganized, at the notes she'd made in the margins, at the woman who was sitting at the desk. He'd expected to use himself with an expression that settled somewhere between surprise and displeasure. "Miss Hartwell, Mr. Marsh." She looked up. "I've been going over the accounts. I have some questions about the Farley Creek property. The maintenance costs for February through April don't match the work orders I'm seeing here." He stared at her. "Those records are in order." "The records are tidy," she agreed. "The figures don't reconcile. There's a discrepancy of about $40 across 3 months. $40 is well within the margin for what?" she asked pleasantly. He stopped. She held his gaze. "For incidental costs," he said. After a moment, "I see," she made a note. "I'll need the invoices for those incidental costs. Whatever documentation you have." He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is deciding how much of a problem this woman is going to be. "Mr. Whitmore has never required that level of documentation before. Mr. Whitmore has hired me to manage these accounts properly," she said. "Which is what I'm doing." She smiled at him, not warmly. "The invoices, Mr. Marsh. When you have a moment," he left. She turned back to the ledger. The $40 was not, she suspected, incidental. She had been managing accounts long enough to recognize the shape of a slow bleed, the kind of leak that happens gradually, transaction by transaction, small enough to remain beneath notice, but consistent enough to add up to something significant over time. She kept her face neutral and kept working. Theodore appeared in the doorway at noon. "Marsh tells me you've asked for additional documentation," he said. "I have." He came into the room and looked at the desk, at the reorganized ledgers, the notes, the systematic work of the past 3 hours. Something moved in his face, not surprise exactly. More like confirmation. "What did you find?" he said. "I found a discrepancy," she said. "I want the documentation before I characterize it further." "How large?" $40 across 3 months. "Which is the amount I can see. The amount I can't see yet may be larger." He was quiet for a moment. "You think Marsh has been skimming?" "I think the numbers don't reconcile," she said. "I think that can have multiple explanations. I'll tell you which explanation is correct when I have the documentation to confirm it." He looked at her. "You've been here 3 hours," he said. "Yes, you found this in 3 hours. The discrepancy is findable in about 40 minutes, she said. "The rest of the time I spent reorganizing the filing system, so this kind of pattern will be easier to identify going forward." Theodore Whitmore sat down in the chair across from her. He looked at the ledger books. He looked at her notes. He looked at Evelyn Hartwell, who had been doing this for 7 years in her family's house for no compensation at all, who had found in 3 hours what his previous manager had missed or ignored for 3 months. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Yes, I owe you an apology." She looked up from the ledger. "For what?" "I told you yesterday that I was offering you this position because I needed someone capable." That was true. But I also told myself it was a straightforward business decision. He paused. It wasn't entirely straightforward. She waited. "I needed someone capable," he said. "But I chose to come to your door specifically because I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. That no one had ever asked what it cost you." He met her eyes. "I wanted to be someone who did something about that, rather than someone who simply observed it and moved on." The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. "That's a dangerous reason to hire someone," she said finally. "I know. If the books don't work out, or if Marsh's situation is worse than it appears, or if my judgment is wrong somewhere, you'll have complicated something that could have remained simple. I know that too." She looked back down at the ledger. "My judgment isn't wrong," she said. "No," he said. "I don't imagine it is." She found the full extent of the discrepancy by Thursday. It was not $40. It was $230 over 14 months. Distributed across 3 properties in amounts small enough to avoid easy detection. Entered against legitimate expense categories with just enough plausible documentation to survive casual review. It was, she thought, actually quite clever work. It required both knowledge of the system and the patience to operate slowly enough to stay invisible. She set the full accounting on Theodore's desk that Thursday afternoon and stood back while he read it. He went through it twice. His jaw tightened on the second pass. $230, he said. "Yes. Over 14 months. Yes." He set the paper down. Looked at her. How many of my previous managers would have found this, if they were looking for it and knew what to look for? Several of them, probably. And if they weren't specifically looking, she met his eyes. None of them. He was quiet. "Marsh has been with this estate for 9 years, Theodore said." His voice was even. She could see the effort it cost him. "I know. He managed my father's property before he managed mine. I know that too. That doesn't change what this is." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." Theodore stood. He crossed to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she watched him process it, not dramatically. Not with the performance of a man who wanted to be seen managing something difficult, but with the genuine private work of a person absorbing an unpleasant truth. "I'll handle Marsh," he said. "All right," he turned back around. "I'd like you here 5 days a week, not 3 for the next month. Until we've gone through everything, and I know the full extent of it." She considered. "That will require an adjustment to the terms." "Name your adjustment," she told him. He agreed without negotiating. She nodded, made a note, and went back to the ledger. And in the quiet of the study, with the afternoon light coming through the window and the accounts spread before her in the order she had created, Evelyn Hartwell did the thing she had been doing for 7 years. She worked. She found the problems. She fixed what could be fixed. She documented what needed to be known. The difference was that this time, someone had asked her to. This time someone was paying her for it. This time, when Theodore came back through the door an hour later and said, "Marsh is gone. Is there anything you need?" and she said, "The Farley Creek invoices from last spring," he went and got them himself. He set the stack of papers on the desk beside her without fanfare. She picked up her pen. She did not say thank you. She did not need to. He understood. 3 weeks into the arrangement, she arrived on a Tuesday morning to find a different chair at the desk. Not a dramatic difference. Not a statement. Just a better chair, one with a back that gave proper support. The kind of chair you sit in for 6 hours without destroying yourself. She stood looking at it for a moment. Then she looked down the hallway toward the direction Theodore's office was. In the east wing, she sat down, pulled the ledger toward her. Picked up her pen. Later, when he passed the study doorway mid-morning, she did not say anything about the chair. He did not mention it either. But she caught, just barely, the way he looked at her when he passed the quick assessment of a man checking that something he'd done had landed correctly, and she felt the warmth of it settle somewhere in her chest in a place. She was trying very hard not to examine too closely, because examining it would require her to think about what it meant. And thinking about what it meant would require her to consider what she wanted. and she had not allowed herself to consider what she wanted in a very long time. She bent her head back to the ledger and kept working. But the feeling stayed. The chair was not the only thing that changed. Evelyn noticed it the way she noticed everything quietly. Without making a show of noticing, filing it away in the part of her mind that catalogued patterns. Theodore began leaving the study door open when he worked in the adjacent room. Not wide open, just enough that sound could pass between them. Enough that if she needed something, she could say so without having to cross the hall and knock. It was a small thing. She told herself it was a small thing. She told herself that every morning for 2 weeks while she walked up the Whitmore Drive and reminded herself that she was here to work. That she was here because the numbers needed her, and the accounts were a disaster, and there were still 3 properties she hadn't fully examined, and the Farley Creek situation had tentacles she was still tracing. Through 14 months of inadequate documentation. She was here to work, she told herself that. And then she would sit down at the desk with the good chair and the open door. And sometime mid-morning Theodore would appear in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee, not asking. Just setting one beside her ledger without interrupting whatever she was in the middle of, and she would say thank you without looking up. And he would say nothing at all, and somehow that nothing felt like more than most people's somethings. She kept working. She told herself it was fine. It was not entirely fine. The problem was not Theodore. The problem was that Evelyn Hartwell had spent 7 years building walls around the part of herself that wanted things. And she had built them well solid high and without doors. She had built them because wanting things that weren't going to happen was a kind of pain she didn't have time for. She had built them because every hour she spent thinking about her own life was an hour she wasn't spending on the ledger books. The creditors, the slow and grinding work of keeping her family solvent. She had built them, and they had held, and she had been fine. And then Theodore Whitmore had pulled out a chair and asked, "What happens to you?" And somewhere in the foundation, something had shifted. She was thinking about this on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks and 4 days into the arrangement. Not that she was counting, when she arrived at the estate, to find a wagon she didn't recognize parked outside. She stopped. The wagon was loaded with boxes, 3 of them. Stacked and roped down, the kind of boxes that held papers. She looked at the wagon, and then at the man standing beside it, who was looking back at her with the alert expressions of someone who has been waiting and is now deciding how to handle what he's been waiting for. He was about 40, well-dressed, with the particular bearing of a man who worked in law, or finance, the kind of person who carried authority the way other people carried pocket watches. Visibly, and with the assumption that other people would find it relevant. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Yes. My name is Clarence Webb." He did not extend his hand. "I represent the estate of Gerald Harlow." She knew the name. Gerald Harlow had been one of her father's original business partners, one of the 3 men who had invested with Edward Hartwell in the textile venture that collapsed 8 years ago. Harlow had died the previous winter. She had noted it in the county records without particular feeling, the way she noted most things. "I see," she said carefully. "What does Mr. Harlow's estate have to do with me?" "Not with you specifically," Webb said. "With the Hartwell family." He paused, and with certain documents that have come to light during the settlement of the estate, her chest went cold. "What kind of documents?" she said. "Perhaps we should speak inside," he said. With Mr. Whitmore present, as he has expressed an interest in this matter, she did not ask how Theodore had come to be involved. She walked past Webb and into the house. Theodore was in the study. He was standing, which meant he'd been pacing, which meant whatever Webb had told him already had unsettled him in a way he hadn't fully resolved. He looked at Evelyn when she came through the door, and something in his face shifted relief. She thought. The specific relief of a man who has been waiting for the person he trusts most in the room to arrive. "Webb found me yesterday," Theodore said without preamble. "He has documents from Harlow's estate. I told him nothing would be decided without you here." She looked at him. Why me? Because what he found concerns your father's business. And because you're the one who's been managing the consequences of it for 7 years. His voice was even. You have more right to this information than anyone. She turned to Webb, who had followed her in, and was now opening the first of the document boxes with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times. Tell me, she said. Webb looked at her. He recalibrated something in his assessment of her. She watched him do it. The small adjustment that happened when men who expected deference encountered something else instead. During the settlement of Gerald Harlow's estate, he said, we discovered a series of correspondence and financial documents related to the Hartwell-Harlow-Callaway textile venture of 1811. Specifically, documents indicating that the venture's collapse was not the result of market failure. As was publicly reported, Evelyn was very still. What was it the result of, she said. Fraud, Webb said. Specifically, the deliberate misappropriation of investor funds by 2 of the 3 partners. He looked at her steadily. Gerald Harlow and a man named Foster Callaway systematically diverted capital from the venture into private accounts over a period of approximately 18 months. They then arranged the venture's collapse in a manner designed to appear as market failure. Your father lost everything he had invested. So did 11 other investors. The room was absolutely silent. Evelyn heard her own breathing. She heard the clock on the mantelpiece. She heard distantly one of the stable hands calling out to someone in the yard. My father was not responsible for the collapse, she said. Your father was the victim of it. She sat down. Not because she was weak, because the mathematics of it hit her all at once. 7 years of numbers. 7 years of ledgers and creditors and sleepless nights and columns that never quite balanced. 7 years of managing the aftermath of something she had believed was her father's failure, and the whole structure of it was built on a lie. Edward Hartwell, Theodore said quietly, spent the last years of his life believing he had destroyed his own family. Yes, Webb said. Theodore looked at Evelyn. She looked back at him. She could feel, very specifically, the thing she was keeping off her face. Because if she let it onto her face, she would not be able to continue this conversation. And this conversation needed to continue. What do the documents prove, she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. Webb opened the second box. They prove the diversion of funds through 3 separate accounts. They include correspondence between Harlow and Callaway explicitly discussing the scheme. And they include a document. He lifted a paper and set it on the desk in front of her, signed by Gerald Harlow 3 weeks before his death, constituting a full written confession. She looked at the paper. She did not touch it. He confessed, she said. His attorney believes he was attempting to clear his conscience before he died. The confession names Callaway as the primary architect of the scheme. It also includes a specific statement that Edward Hartwell had no knowledge of or participation in the fraud. Evelyn pressed her hands flat on the desk. She had sat in this exact position before, hands flat. Breathing controlled, face arranged into something that could pass for neutral while her mind did what it needed to do. She had sat this way at the kitchen table going through accounts. She had sat this way across from creditors. She had sat this way the night she told her mother, carefully and without emotion, that they had 6 months before the reserves ran out. She had never sat this way with tears in her throat. Miss Hartwell, Theodore said. I'm all right, she said. He said nothing, but he came around the desk and stood beside her. Close enough that she was aware of him, close enough that if she had needed to, she could have steadied herself against that presence. He did not touch her. He just stood there. It was, she thought, exactly the right thing to do. What happens now? She said to Webb. That depends on several things, Webb said. The confession is legally significant, but not automatically actionable. Callaway is still living. He resides in Richmond and has been a successful merchant for the past 6 years, which we now understand was built partly on capital stolen from this venture. There are grounds for a civil claim against Callaway's estate. There are also grounds for a formal public correction of the record regarding your father's reputation. A hearing, Theodore said. A formal proceeding, yes, before a county magistrate. To enter the documents into record and establish the official account. And if we pursue this, Evelyn said. What does that require? Your testimony, Webb said. Your account of the financial consequences to your family. The years of debt, the management of it. It establishes the scope of the harm. He paused. It will be public record, everything you say. She understood what he was not quite saying. She understood that a public hearing meant the county would know all of it. The debts, the years, the things she had done to keep the family standing. The things that had cost her, all the things she had kept private. She was quiet for a long moment, then she said when. Webb blinked. He had expected she could tell. More resistance, more deliberation. More of the female reluctance he'd probably been preparing for since he arrived. We can file for a hearing within the month, he said. Then file, she said. Theodore looked at her. She looked back at him. My father spent the last years of his life thinking he had failed us, she said. He died believing it. I am not going to let that stand on record when I have the means to correct it. Theodore held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once with the particular gravity of a man who understands exactly what something is costing. I'll appear as a witness, he said to Webb. As a landowner with knowledge of the county's financial records and the Hartwell family's situation. Whatever testimony supports this. Webb looked between them. Very well, he said. I'll begin the filing. The news moved through the county the way news always moved faster than anyone who wasn't spreading it would have believed possible. And louder by the time it arrived than it was when it left. Within a week, everyone knew that there was to be a hearing. Within 10 days, everyone knew what the hearing concerned. Within 2 weeks, the story had acquired the particular momentum of something that people had strong feelings about, either the conviction that the Hartwells had been wronged, and justice was long overdue, or the rather more complicated feeling that comes over respectable people when someone begins pulling on a thread that might unravel something they'd rather leave intact. Foster Calloway, it turned out, had friends. Evelyn discovered this on a Thursday morning when she arrived at the Whitmore estate and found Theodore in the study with a letter in his hand and an expression on his face that she had learned to read as contained anger not explosive. Not performative, just very cold and very contained. Calloway's attorney sent this, he said, and handed her the letter. She read it. It was elegantly written, as letters from expensive attorneys tend to be full of words that sounded like courtesy but functioned as threat. It suggested in language carefully calibrated to be unprovable as explicit intimidation that pursuing this matter publicly would be ill-advised. It referenced Theodore's pending land acquisition in the southern part of the county, which required the cooperation of the county land board. 3 members of which were, the letter did not quite say but clearly implied, associates of Foster Calloway. It also referenced Evelyn. Not by name at first, by implication. The letter noted that the primary witness in the proposed hearing was a young woman of limited social standing, whose account of private family financial matters would be subject to considerable scrutiny. It suggested that a woman who had been managing accounts for an unmarried man and who had recently been the subject of public notice at a county social function might find her credibility examined in ways she would find uncomfortable. Evelyn read this twice. She set the letter down on the desk with considerable care. The way you set down something you are choosing not to throw. He's threatening you through your land acquisition, she said. He's threatening both of us, Theodore said. He's threatening me through my reputation. She looked up. He's suggesting that because I sat down at a wedding and because I work here, my testimony can be dismissed. That's what he has, she said. That's the best he can do. She picked up the letter again. Reread the relevant section. Set it back down. He doesn't have anything that actually contradicts the documents. So he's going after the witness, which means the documents are solid. She agreed. She looked at Theodore. What do you want to do about the land acquisition? Nothing, he said immediately. Theodore. If Calloway's associates on the land board, I said nothing, he said. I'm not withdrawing from this hearing because a man who stole from 11 families is threatening my business interests. He looked at her directly. Are you withdrawing? She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. But the absurdity of the question, the idea that she had come this far, had sat in this chair and read that confession and thought about her father, and might now step back because of insinuations about her character, was almost funny. No, she said. Then we proceed. She nodded, turned back to the desk. Picked up her pen. She did not tell him that her hands were not entirely steady. He did not mention it, but a moment later he sat down across from her, not at his own desk, but in the chair across from hers in the study where she could see him, and opened his own papers and began working. He stayed there all morning. She noticed. She did not say anything about it. But she noticed. The morning before the hearing, Caroline came. Evelyn was at the house a rare weekday at home, using the time to organize the documents she'd been asked to bring as supporting evidence. She was at the kitchen table with 3 stacks of papers and a cup of tea that had gone cold when she heard the front door, and then footsteps, and then her sister's voice asking Dora where Evelyn was. She did not arrange her face. She waited. Caroline came into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. She was dressed carefully, the way she dressed when she was going somewhere that mattered. And she had the look she sometimes got, the one that meant she'd been rehearsing what she wanted to say, and was now uncertain whether she'd rehearsed the right thing. Evelyn, she said. Caroline. She gestured at the chair across the table. Sit down, her sister sat. She looked at the stacks of papers. She looked at Evelyn. You're going through with it, she said. Yes. Mother says it's going to be terrible. That people will talk about the family. That everything we've kept private will become public record, Evelyn said. Yes, that's accurate. Doesn't that worry you? Evelyn set down her pen. She looked at her sister, really looked, the way she sometimes let herself look when she wasn't managing anything. When she just allowed herself to see Caroline clearly, without the film of obligation and resentment and love that usually complicated the view. Caroline was not cruel. She never had been. She was a woman who had been raised to look in one direction, and she had looked in that direction faithfully her whole life. And she had simply never thought to turn around. What worries me, Evelyn said, is that Papa died thinking he had failed us. That worries me considerably more than what the county thinks of our finances. Caroline was quiet. I didn't know how bad it was. I didn't know about the debts or the ledger, or she stopped. I didn't know you'd paid for the wedding. Not the full amount. I thought you'd contributed. Everything, Evelyn said. Not harshly. I contributed everything. Caroline. Her sister's face changed. Evelyn watched it change, watched the understanding arrive and the discomfort that came with it, and then, underneath both of those things, something that might, eventually, become something more honest than either of them. I'm sorry, Caroline said. The words came out small and real. Not performed. Not the practiced apology of someone who wanted to be forgiven quickly and move on. The genuine small sound of a woman arriving, maybe for the first time, at the actual weight of something. Evelyn looked at her. I know, she said. I know you didn't mean to, Evelyn said. That's not the same as it not happening, but I know. Caroline's eyes filled. She pressed her fingers against her mouth. She did not speak for a moment. What can I do, she said, for the hearing? What can I do? Evelyn looked at her sister. Come, she said simply. Sit in that room. Let people see that the Hartwell family is not ashamed of the truth. She held Caroline's gaze. That would mean something. Caroline nodded. She reached across the table past the stacks of documents, past the cold cup of tea, past 7 years of unspoken accounting, and covered Evelyn's hand with hers. She did not say anything else. She didn't need to. The hearing was held on a Friday morning in the county magistrate's office, which was a room that had seen its share of difficult things and wore that history in its floorboards and its particular quality of silence. Evelyn arrived early. Theodore was already there. He looked at her when she came through the door, and he held her gaze for a moment steady. Present, the look of a man who was exactly where he had said he would be, and intended to remain there. Ready, she said. She was not entirely. But she was close enough. Webb had arranged the documents in the order they would be presented. The magistrate, a man named Caldwell, who had the alert, careful demeanor of someone who had learned that the most important part of his job was listening, sat behind his desk and reviewed the preliminary filing. Calloway was present with his attorney. He was a broad, florid man of about 60 who sat with the particular stillness of someone who had been told very clearly by his lawyer to display no reaction to anything. He looked at Evelyn once when she came in. She looked back. She did not look away first. The hearing began. Webb presented the documents. He presented the confession, reading the relevant section aloud in his measured, legal voice, and Evelyn heard her father's name said in a formal proceeding and described as a victim and felt something move in her chest that she would not let reach her face. Not here. Not yet. Calloway's attorney objected to the confession on 3 procedural grounds. Caldwell overruled 2 of them and reserved judgment on the 3rd. Then Webb called Evelyn. She sat in the chair designated for testimony, and she looked at the magistrate and she told the truth. She told it the way she did everything methodically. Specifically, without embroidery or drama. She told him the year she took over the accounts, the state of them when she did, the creditors, the decisions, the wedding, which she described with the same matter-of-fact precision she would have used in a ledger entry. Cost, source of funds, outcome. She heard the room shift when she said the wedding. She kept going. Calloway's attorney cross-examined her. He was good. He asked his questions in the order designed to suggest, without quite saying, that her account was self-serving. That a woman managing accounts outside her own household was unusual. That her relationship with Theodore Whitmore, he said it carefully. That word, relationship, might color her testimony. Evelyn answered every question. She answered them the way she answered everything, with the specific, unassailable precision of someone who had the numbers memorized, who had the documentation organized, who had done the work and could demonstrate it. She did not get flustered. She did not get defensive. She got more exact. At some point, she became aware that the room had gone very quiet. Not the silence of discomfort, the silence of people listening. Calloway's attorney asked her, near the end, "Miss Hartwell, would you characterize your management of your family's accounts as conventional? For a woman of your age and station?" She looked at him. "No," she said, "I would characterize it as necessary. Someone had to do it. I was the person who could." She paused. "Conventional or not, the numbers are what they are. And the harm done to my father is what it is. Neither of those things changes based on what you consider appropriate for a woman of my station." The room was very quiet. Caldwell looked at Calloway's attorney. The attorney had nothing more to say. Theodore was called next. He testified to his knowledge of the county's financial records, of the Hartwell family's situation as he had observed it over years of business dealings in the county, and of the documented discrepancy in the business ventures records that corroborated Webb's evidence. He was precise and complete and thorough, and when Calloway's attorney tried the same insinuation about his relationship with Evelyn, Theodore looked at the attorney with an expression of such absolute calm composure that the attorney moved on before completing his question. The hearing lasted 4 hours. At the end of it, Magistrate Caldwell looked at the documents on his desk. He looked at Evelyn, he looked at Theodore, he looked at Calloway, who was still maintaining his careful stillness. "The confession of Gerald Harlow," Caldwell said, "in combination with the corroborating financial documentation, constitutes sufficient evidence to enter a formal finding that the collapse of the Hartwell-Harlow-Calloway venture of 1811 was the result of fraudulent activity by Gerald Harlow and Foster Calloway. The record will reflect that Edward Hartwell bore no responsibility for the venture's failure and was himself a victim of the scheme. He set down his papers. A civil claim against the Calloway estate will be heard at a separate proceeding. This office will issue the formal correction of record within the week. He looked up. "We're adjourned," he said. The room began to move. Evelyn sat in the testimony chair for a moment without standing. Not because she couldn't, because she was doing the thing she had been doing for 4 hours, keeping her face exactly right, and she needed a moment before she stopped. A hand appeared beside her. She looked up. Theodore was standing beside the chair with his hand extended. Not to help her up, she didn't need help, but the way you extend a hand to someone as a simple, human gesture of presence. "I'm here, you did it, here." She took his hand, she stood. Across the room, Caroline was there. She had come, as she'd said she would, sat in the back of the room through all 4 hours and not left. She was looking at Evelyn now with wet eyes and a steadiness that Evelyn recognized. Distantly, as something Hartwell, Beatrice had not come. Evelyn had not expected her to, but she had not expected Caroline. That mattered. Outside in the hallway, Calloway moved past them with his attorney. He did not look at Evelyn. He stared ahead with the face of a man who understood that the next proceeding was going to be considerably less comfortable than this one. As he passed, Evelyn said quietly and without particular heat, "My father was a good man." Calloway did not stop, but his step changed, just slightly, the involuntary shift of a person who has been reached somewhere they thought was unreachable. She watched him go. Theodore stood beside her. "Are you all right?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Not entirely," she said. "But I will be." "Yes," he said. "You will?" She believed him. And standing in that hallway, with the formal correction of record ordered, and her father's name restored, and 4 hours of telling the truth behind her, Evelyn Hartwell let herself feel for just a moment the full weight of what had just happened, all of it. Every year of it. Then she straightened, and she walked out into the light. The formal correction of record was published on a Wednesday. Evelyn read it at the kitchen table with her morning coffee. The way she read everything straight through, without stopping, taking in the full shape of it before allowing herself any reaction. The county magistrate's official notice, printed in the Virginia Gazette, stated clearly and without equivocation that the collapse of the Hartwell-Harlow-Calloway textile venture of 1811 had been the result of fraud perpetrated by Gerald Harlow and Foster Calloway. That Edward Hartwell had been a victim, that the record was hereby corrected. 12 lines. 7 years of her life reduced to 12 lines of official print. She read it twice, then she folded the paper carefully and set it on the table, and sat with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and let herself feel the full strange weight of it, not relief. Exactly, not yet, but something adjacent to relief. The particular sensation of a door being opened that you had stopped believing would ever open. Dora came in from the hallway, looked at Evelyn's face, and quietly put a second cup of coffee on the table without saying anything. Evelyn looked up. "Thank you, Dora." Dora nodded and went back about her work. That was the thing about Dora. She had been with the Hartwell household for 11 years. She knew, without being told, when something significant had happened, and what kind of response it required. The woman was worth 3 times what Evelyn had been supplementing her salary with. And when the civil proceeding against Calloway concluded, when the compensation came through, if it came through, the first thing Evelyn intended to do was correct that. She picked up the paper again. She thought about her father. Edward Hartwell had been a careful man, deliberate. The kind of man who checked his figures twice and explained his reasoning out loud because he believed that good decisions came from understanding the whole picture. He had taught Evelyn her first account keeping at his desk when she was 9 years old, setting her on his knee and showing her how a ledger worked, how every outgoing had to be matched against an incoming, how the balance was not just a number but a story. How you could read a household's health in the columns if you knew what to look for. He had been proud of her for understanding it quickly. He had been proud of her, full stop, in the uncomplicated, unconditioned way that parents sometimes manage before the world teaches them to make love contingent on performance. She had not thought about that in a long time. She thought about it now. He had died believing he failed them. He had died with that weight. And no one had taken it from him, and she could not take it from him now. That was the truth she had to live with. The correction of record did not reach where he was. It reached everywhere else: the county, the neighbors, the creditors who had looked at the Hartwell name with a particular expression for 8 years, but it did not reach him. She pressed her fingers against her eyes. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and went to find her mother. Beatrice was in the front parlor, which was where she went when she wanted to be found, but did not want to appear to be waiting. She was sitting with embroidery she was not actually working on. The needle threaded through the fabric and left there while her hands rested in her lap. She looked up when Evelyn came in. "I saw the paper," Beatrice said. "I thought you would." Her mother looked down at the embroidery. "I should have come," she said, "to the hearing." Evelyn sat in the chair across from her. She did not say anything. "I was afraid," Beatrice said. "Of what people would say. Of being looked at." She stopped. "That was wrong of me." "Yes," Evelyn said. Her mother's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "I'm not accustomed to being told I'm wrong, I know. Mama, by my daughter particularly. I know that too." A silence settled between them, not comfortable. Not entirely uncomfortable, but honest in the specific way that silences are when two people have stopped performing for each other and haven't yet figured out what comes next. "Your father would have been proud," Beatrice said finally. Her voice was different when she said it, smaller. "Of what you did in that room." Evelyn looked at her mother. She had waited a long time to hear something like that. Long enough that she had stopped expecting it. Long enough that hearing it now, in her mother's careful, slightly ashamed voice, landed somewhere complicated, not clean. Not simple, not the uncomplicated balm it might have been if it had come sooner. But it was real, and that mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. Beatrice picked up her embroidery, not to work on it, just to have something to do with her hands. "What happens now?" "With the civil matter. Webb believes the proceeding will be scheduled within 2 months. The documented amount is substantial. If the magistrate finds in our favor, which Webb considers likely given the confession, there will be compensation. Enough to clear the remaining debt," Evelyn said. "And then some." Her mother was quiet. She looked at the embroidery needle. "Silver and still, and Mr. Whitmore," she said. Evelyn kept her face neutral. "What about him? He testified for you. He testified to the facts of the case, Evelyn." Her mother looked at her with the particular expression she used when she wanted her daughter to stop being precise and start being honest. "He sat beside you at that hearing for 4 hours. He testified in terms that left no room for Calloway's attorney to maneuver. And before all of that, he appeared at this house the morning after your sister's wedding." She paused. "I am not without observation." Evelyn said nothing. "Do you care for him?" Beatrice asked. "Mama, it's a simple question. It's not a simple situation, Evelyn." Her mother set the embroidery down entirely. "For 27 years, I have watched you manage every complicated situation this family put in front of you. I have watched you carry things that she stopped. Started again. That I should have carried. And I have not always said what I should have said about it." She met her daughter's eyes. "I am asking you now, do you care for him?" The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at her mother. She thought about the answer, the real answer. Not the careful one she would have given anyone else. Not the precise and non-committal version she had been giving herself for the past 3 weeks. "Yes," she said. Beatrice nodded. Something in her face settled, not quite satisfaction, but the expression of a woman who has confirmed something she already knew and is relieved to have it confirmed. Then don't be foolish about it, she said. She picked up her embroidery again. That's all I'm going to say. Theodore appeared at the Hartwell house that same afternoon. Evelyn was in the study, her father's old study, which she had taken over 3 years ago when it became clear that the account-keeping required more space than the kitchen table could provide, when Dora came to tell her he was at the door. She heard the particular way Dora said Mr. Whitmore and understood that Dora, too, had her observations. She went to the door. He was holding his hat, which she had come to recognize as the version of Theodore that was slightly less certain than usual. He held his hat when he was about to say something that mattered and hadn't fully finished deciding how to say it. I saw the notice in the Gazette, he said. Come in, she said. She led him to the front parlor. Beatrice had removed herself efficiently and without comment within approximately 30 seconds of hearing his voice in the hall, which was its own kind of statement. Evelyn sat. Theodore sat across from, hat in his hands, and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the focused precision he wore when he was working. Not the controlled containment he used in public. Something more unguarded than either of those. I owe you an apology, he said. For what? Exactly. He looked at his hat. Then at her. I thought I was helping. I believed that coming forward as a witness, making my position clear publicly, I thought I was supporting you. He paused. It didn't occur to me until afterward that what I'd done was make your private situation the subject of a public proceeding. That I had, without asking you, forced into the open things you had kept private for years. She studied him. I agreed to the hearing. You agreed because the alternative was allowing a false record to stand about your father, he said. That's not the same as genuinely choosing to have your family's finances made public record. I gave you a situation where you had no good option but one. And then I told myself I was helping. He met her eyes directly. That was not entirely honest. She was quiet for a moment. You're right, she said. He looked slightly surprised that she agreed so readily. You did give me a situation where I had limited options, she said. Bringing Webb to me the way you did, making yourself part of it before I had the full picture, yes. That constrained my choices. She held his gaze, and the outcome was correct. My father's name is restored. The record is right. So I'm not angry. She paused. But you're right that you should have asked first. He nodded. He accepted this the way he accepted most things, without deflection. Without qualification, without the instinct. Some men had to immediately explain why their motives had been good, and therefore the action should be excused. He just took it. That was, she thought, one of the things about him. I have a habit, he said slowly, of deciding what needs to be done and doing it. It has served me well in business. It has not always served me well with people. He was quiet for a moment. Eleanor used to say I had a gift for solving problems that weren't mine to solve. She sounds like she was perceptive, Evelyn said. She was. Something moved in his face. She would have liked you considerably. The words landed quietly between them. Not heavy, just real, in the way of something true that someone has decided to say out loud. Theodore, Evelyn said. He looked at her. She had used his given name. She had not done that before. She watched him register at the slight shift. The attention sharpening. The way a person looks when something they have been waiting for arrives differently than they expected. The position you offered me, she said. The accounts work. I want you to know that I took it because it was a good position, and I needed the income and I was capable of the work. Not because I needed rescuing, I know that, he said. I want to be certain you know it. Because there is a version of this where you have been generous and I have been grateful, and that gratitude has become. She stopped. I don't want that version. He was looking at her with full attention, not waiting for her to finish so he could respond. Actually listening. What version do you want, he said. She thought about it. An honest one, she said, where you tell me what you're actually thinking instead of managing the situation. Where I tell you when you've overstepped instead of absorbing it. Where neither of us is performing anything. He was quiet. That's a more demanding version, he said. Yes. I'm not certain I know how to do that consistently. Neither am I, she said. I've been managing things quietly for so long that I'm not entirely sure I know how to say what I mean without first calculating its effect. Something in his face eased. Not a smile, something softer. The expression of a person recognizing themselves in a description they didn't expect to fit. We are, he said, both somewhat terrible at this. Apparently, she said. A beat passed. I don't want to be your employer, he said. She stilled. I mean, reconsidered. Started again. With the particular care of a man who has decided that precision matters here more than composure. The position was genuine. The work is genuine. But I did not go to your door that morning only because I needed someone to manage my accounts. He held her gaze. I went because I could not stop thinking about a woman who had paid for a wedding and been handed a serving tray. And I wanted very specifically to know what happened to her next. The room was very quiet. Evelyn looked at Theodore Whitmore. She thought about walls. About the ones she'd built and how well she'd built them. And how they had been so thoroughly necessary for so long. She thought about what it cost to keep building something that no longer entirely served its purpose. What are you saying? She said, not coyly. She genuinely wanted him to say it plainly. He understood that. I'm saying that I would like if you are willing to make a different kind of offer. Not employment, not assistance. He paused. Courtship. Conducted honestly, on your terms, at whatever pace makes sense to you. With the explicit understanding that you are not obligated to any particular outcome and that I will not manage the situation on your behalf. She looked at him for a long moment. You'll ask instead of deciding, she said. I'll ask instead of deciding. And if I tell you you've overstepped, I'll stop, he said. And I'll listen, she held his gaze. All right, she said. He breathed, just once controlled, but she caught it. All right, she said again, quieter. We'll try the honest version. The honest version was, it turned out both more difficult and more sustaining than anything either of them had managed before. It started small. He asked the following Tuesday whether she wanted the window in the study opened or closed. Because the morning had turned warm and he'd been leaving it closed, on the assumption she preferred quiet. She told him she preferred air. He opened the window. She told him thank you. He said you're welcome, and there was something so ordinary and so careful about the exchange that she had to look back at the ledger quickly before her face did something she wasn't ready for. He asked her opinion on the Farley Creek property, not as her employer seeking a financial assessment, but as a man asking a person whose judgment he respected what she thought should be done with a piece of land that had been underperforming for 2 years. She told him what she thought, in the direct and specific way she thought it, without softening her conclusion for his comfort. He listened. He did not immediately agree. He pushed back on 2 of her points with reasoning that was actually sound. She reconsidered one of her conclusions. He reconsidered the other. They reached a decision together. It was, she thought afterward, the most satisfying professional conversation she had ever had. Because it was the first one she'd had with someone who treated her reasoning as something to engage with, rather than something to receive politely and then set aside. She told him this. He was quiet for a moment. I should tell you something, he said. She set down her pen. 3 weeks ago. Jeremiah Alcott came to see me. She recognized the name. Alcott was a county magistrate's clerk, a useful man to know, and one who moved in the same social circles as half the landowners in the county. About what? About you. Theodore looked at her directly. He suggested, not without delicacy, but clearly, that my association with you was becoming a topic of conversation. That a man in my position, dealing with a woman who had made herself conspicuous through the hearing, might find it advisable to create some distance. She felt her jaw tighten. And I told him to mind his own affairs, Theodore said. I said it more politely than that, but that was the substance. She looked at him. You didn't tell me. No. Why not? Because I thought telling you would make you feel responsible for a problem that wasn't yours, he said. And then I remembered what we'd agreed, that I would tell you instead of managing it. He held her gaze. So I'm telling you. She sat with that. People are going to keep talking, she said. Yes. It's going to get worse before the civil proceeding concludes. Probably. Calloway's people will use anything they can to discredit me. They'll try. She looked at him steadily. Does that concern you? Genuinely. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The talking doesn't concern me, he said. The possibility that it costs you something it shouldn't, that concerns me. It won't cost me anything I'm not willing to pay, she said. He nodded. Then we're agreed. She picked up her pen. He picked up his papers. They worked in companionable quiet for the better part of an hour. Outside, the summer afternoon moved in the particular unhurried way of Virginia summers. And inside the study the accounts took shape under Evelyn's hands with the satisfying precision of things being properly ordered. Then Theodore said, without looking up from his papers, "My sister's birthday would have been this Thursday." She went still. "Eleanor," he said, "she would have been 41. Evelyn set her pen down. "I've been thinking about her more than usual this week," he said. He was looking at the paper in his hand, but she understood he was not reading it. "After the hearing, after watching you in that room," he paused. "She deserved someone who would have done for her what you did for your father. Who would have stood up and said this woman's work was real. This woman's sacrifice was real. It happened, it counted. No one did that for her," Evelyn said quietly. "No," he said. She watched him carry it. The specific weight of a person who has understood a failure fully and will not excuse themselves from it. "You're doing it now," she said. He looked up. "You can't go back," she said. "But what you've done since you walked onto that wedding lawn, that's not nothing." "Theodore, that counts too." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are," he said, "one of the most honest people I have ever known." She held his gaze. "It took me a long time to afford it, I know." He looked at her steadily. "I don't intend to make it cost you again." The words landed simply. Not as a grand declaration, nothing about Theodore was grand. Just the plain and unadorned statement of a man who meant what he said and trusted the other person to understand it. She understood it. The letter from Webb arrived on a Friday. 6 weeks after the hearing. Evelyn was at the Whitmore estate when it came. Theodore's messenger brought it from the house, writing fast enough that she and Theodore both looked up from their work when they heard the hooves on the drive. The letter was brief. Webb had a gift for brevity. The civil proceeding against Foster Calloway had concluded. The magistrate had ruled in favor of the Hartwell estate. The compensation ordered was enough to clear the remaining debt on the Hartwell property entirely, with a surplus that Webb estimated conservatively at approximately $400. She read it standing up. She read it again. Then she sat down very slowly in the nearest chair, not the good chair at the desk. Just the chair by the door, the closest one, and she held the letter in her hands and she thought about 14 months. About the number she had calculated by lamplight after the wedding. The number of months she had given them before the choices became impossible. About the column of figures she had been carrying in her head like a stone for 3 years. The stone was gone. Theodore appeared in the doorway. He had heard her come in from the study and had followed. He looked at her face and then at the letter and said nothing. Because he understood already what the letter was. She looked up at him. "It's done," she said. He crossed the room and sat beside her, not across from her. Beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and he held out his hand. She gave him the letter. He read it. He folded it. He held it for a moment. "Your father's debt is cleared," he said. "Yes, and the surplus is enough to do what needs doing," she said. "The staffing, the maintenance, the things I've been trying to raise with my mother for 2 years," she breathed. "We're not going to lose the house." He gave her back the letter. She held it with both hands. Outside in the yard, Someone was calling to someone else, and a horse was being walked to the stable, and the ordinary afternoon sounds of a working estate went on precisely as they had before. "Evelyn," he said. He reached up, very carefully, and tucked a strand of hair that had come loose at her temple back behind her ear. Not lingering, not making a moment of it, just the specific, quiet gesture of a person who could not do it, and who had decided to stop pretending otherwise. She did not look away. "I would like to speak with your mother," he said. She held his gaze. "You could speak with me," she said. "I'm the one whose answer matters." Something shifted in his face. "Yes," he said, "you're right." He looked at her directly. "Will you marry me?" Not on one knee, not with a speech. Just the question, clean and direct, from a man who had learned, was still learning to ask instead of decide. She thought about it. She thought about the chair he'd pulled out at the wedding. About the coffee left beside the ledger without interruption. About the open door between their workrooms. About the conversation in which he'd admitted he was wrong before she had asked him to. About the birthday he'd mentioned on a Thursday afternoon. The grief he hadn't performed, but simply carried within reach of her, where she could see it was real. She thought about an honest version, and what it could be, if they were both willing to keep choosing it. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The answer had landed in him. She could see it not with relief, but with something more serious. The weight of someone receiving something they intended to be worthy of. "I'm not going to be easy to be married to," he said. "I know," she said. "I'll overstep," he said. "I'll try to manage things I should ask about first. And I'll tell you when you do," she said. "And you'll stop and listen." "Yes. And I'll do the same when I go quiet instead of saying what's wrong." He looked at her. "Deal," he said. She almost laughed. It was so simple. After everything, so simply said. She looked at the letter in her hands, the formal end of 8 years of debt. 12 lines of print that had changed the shape of her life, and she thought, this is what it looks like when things go right. Not grand. Not perfect. Just true. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She stood. "Come with me," she said. "I want to go tell my mother." He stood. He offered her his arm, asking, with the gesture, the way he had learned to ask. She took it. They walked out of the study together. Into the afternoon, into whatever came next. Beatrice Hartwell did not cry when they told her. She sat in the front parlor, with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and her face composed into the particular arrangement she had worn for so many years that Evelyn sometimes wondered if her mother knew. Any more when she was wearing it, and when she wasn't. She listened to Theodore speak clearly, directly. The way he did everything, and when he finished she was quiet for a moment that stretched long enough that Evelyn felt the old instinct rise in her chest. The one that said, "Step in, smooth it over, make this easier for everyone." She did not step in, she waited. "You understand," Beatrice said finally. To Theodore, that my daughter is not a simple woman's. "Ma'am," he said, "that's precisely why I'm here." Something moved in Beatrice's face. Not quite a smile. The motion a smile makes before a woman of her particular pride allows it to fully form. "She will tell you when you're wrong," she said. "I'm counting on it. She will manage your accounts better than anyone you've ever employed. She already has. And she will not," Beatrice said. With a precision that made clear, this was the point she had been building toward. Be made to feel invisible. Not in her own home. Not anywhere. The room was very still. Theodore looked at Beatrice Hartwell with an expression that was not deference and not performance. Just honest recognition, the look of a man who understands he is being told something important by someone who has earned the right to say it, even if the earning came late. "No," he said. Beatrice looked at her daughter. Evelyn held her mother's gaze, and in that moment, brief and unannounced and entirely without ceremony, something passed between them that neither of them would have been able to name exactly, but that both of them understood, an accounting of sorts. Not of money, of something older and more complicated than money. The kind of reckoning that happens between women when they are finally honest about what they owe each other. Beatrice nodded once. "Then you have my blessing," she said. "For whatever that is worth. It's worth a great deal." "Mama," Evelyn said quietly. Her mother smoothed her dress, and walked to the door with the bearing of a woman who had just done something that cost her and had no intention of letting anyone see how much. At the doorway she paused. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Without turning, "She takes her coffee without sugar. She won't tell you that herself because she won't want to be a bother. But she should have it the way she likes it." Then she was gone. Theodore turned to look at Evelyn. Evelyn looked back at him. "She's been watching," Evelyn said. "Apparently," he said. She pressed her lips together against something that was fully, this time a laugh. "The county had opinions." Of course it did. A county the size of theirs, where everyone knew everyone's business and the knowing was considered a civic function, it was going to have opinions about Theodore Whitmore, announcing his intention to marry Evelyn Hartwell, formerly the invisible older daughter of the debt-ridden Hartwell family. Now the woman whose testimony had exposed a 14-year-old fraud and restored her father's name to the official record. The opinions divided themselves roughly in half. Half the county thought it was the most sensible thing Theodore Whitmore had done in years, and said so with the particular satisfaction of people who had been observing his solitary existence for a decade and had opinions about it. Eleanor Whitmore had been gone for 6 years. Theodore had built a fine estate and managed it well and lived in it alone and said nothing about any of it. And if the county had been waiting for him to do something about that situation, they had been waiting with considerable patience. The other half thought it was irregular. A woman who worked. A woman who had made herself conspicuous at a formal hearing. A woman who had not, by most accounts, behaved with the quiet and appropriate deference the situation called for. These people said their piece, and then, when it became clear that Theodore Whitmore was entirely indifferent to their piece, found other things to discuss. Calloway's people made one more attempt. It came in the form of a letter, not to Evelyn this time, but to Theodore, from Calloway's attorney, suggesting that the compensation order from the civil proceeding was being appealed on procedural grounds, and that the appeal could be lengthy and costly, and that a reasonable settlement offer was available if the parties were interested in concluding the matter quietly. Theodore read the letter at breakfast on a Tuesday morning. He passed it to Evelyn. She read it, set it down, drank her coffee without sugar, in the cup that had been placed beside her at the table, without comment, exactly as she preferred it. Then she picked up her pen and wrote 4 words on a piece of paper and slid it back to him. He looked at the paper. "We decline. File response." He looked at her. "You're certain?" he said. "They're stalling," she said. "The appeal has no grounds. Webb told us as much last week. They want a quiet settlement, because a quiet settlement means a smaller number that doesn't go into any public record." She met his eyes. "The full amount goes into public record, Theodore. Every dollar. So everyone who knew my father can see exactly what was taken from him." He folded both the letter and her 4 words into his coat pocket. "I'll send Webb the instruction this morning. Thank you." He poured himself more coffee. "You know they'll try something else." "Probably," she said. "People who've operated a certain way for a long time don't stop because a magistrate told them to. They wait for the attention to move on, and then they look for a different door." She picked up the ledger she'd been working through before the letter arrived. "Let them look. We'll be watching the accounts." He looked at her across the table. She did not look up from the ledger, but she could feel him looking. And she could feel the particular quality of it, not scrutiny, not assessment, just the look of a man who is sitting at his own table and is, for the first time in a very long time, glad to be there. She kept working. She was glad too. The wedding was planned for October. Not a large wedding. That had been Evelyn's first and clearest position, stated without apology 3 days after the engagement, when Beatrice had begun making sounds about the county families that should be invited and the impression that should be made. Evelyn had sat across from her mother with her hands folded on the kitchen table and said, "Small family," the people who had actually been present for any of this. Her mother had started to object. "Mama," Evelyn said, "I planned one large wedding for this family already. I believe I've fulfilled that obligation." Beatrice had closed her mouth. The guest list was 31 people. Caroline was her attendant. This had taken a conversation, a real one, longer and more honest than most conversations the Hartwell sisters had managed in their adult lives. Conducted on the back porch of the Hartwell house one evening in August with 2 cups of tea that went cold, because neither of them was paying attention to them. "I want to ask you something," Caroline said, "and I want you to actually tell me the truth. Not the version of the truth you think I can handle." Evelyn looked at her. "All right, did you resent me?" Caroline said, "all those years. Did you resent me for not seeing?" The question sat between them. Evelyn thought about the honest version. She had promised it to Theodore. She might as well extend the practice. "Yes," she said. "Sometimes," Caroline flinched, "just slightly. Not always," Evelyn said. "And not the way you're thinking. I didn't resent you for being loved, or for being married, or for any of the things you had. I resented," she stopped, found the right words. "I resented that the work was invisible. That what I did every day was just the background of everyone else's life. That no one thought to ask whether I was all right with that." "You weren't," Caroline said. "No," Evelyn said, "I wasn't." Caroline looked at her tea. She turned the cup in her hands. "I'm asking now," she said quietly. "Are you all right?" Evelyn looked at her sister. Looked at her carefully and honestly, the way she had been learning to look at things lately, without managing the view. "I'm getting there," she said. Caroline reached over and took her hand. She held it without saying anything. No performance in it. No apology wrapped in niceness. Just the simple human warmth of a sister deciding that the distance was done. "I'd like to be your attendant," Caroline said. "If you'll have me." "Yes," Evelyn said. "I will, 2 weeks before the wedding." Something happened that nobody planned. Evelyn was at the county records office. She had made a habit of going once a month to review the updated land records. A professional thoroughness that had already caught 2 discrepancies in boundary filings that would have cost the Whitmore estate considerably if left unaddressed when the records clerk, a young man named Peters, who had always been pleasant to her, called her to the front desk. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "There's something here you should see." She came to the desk. He set a bound document in front of her official county record. Dated 1811. It was the original partnership agreement for the Hartwell-Harlow-Callaway textile venture. She had seen versions of this document before, in the evidence presented at the hearing. But this was the original, the one filed with the county at the venture's founding, and it had a page she had not seen before. The last page, an addendum dated 3 months after the original filing, in which the terms of capital contribution were modified. She read it again. Her father's signature was on the addendum. So were Harlow's and Callaway's, but her father's signature was accompanied by a notation she had not seen in any of the copies. Contributed under agreement of preferred return, terms separate. She looked up at Peters. "Where has this been?" "In the bound record." "Ma'am, it's always been there. It just wasn't included in the copies submitted to the hearing because nobody requested the original bound volume." He paused. "I found it when I was refiling the Hartwell documents after the correction of record." "I thought you'd want to know." She looked at the addendum again. A preferred return agreement meant her father had invested under a structure that should have given him specific financial protections when the venture was dissolved. Protections that had never been honored. Protections that, if they had been honored, would have returned a significant portion of his investment, regardless of the venture's failure. The amount was not small. She was very still. She said, "I need a certified copy of this page." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I thought you might." She rode directly to Webb's office. She set the certified copy on his desk. She stood back and watched him read it. He read it 3 times. Then he set it down and looked at her with the expression of a man who has just discovered that a case he thought was concluded has an additional chapter. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "do you understand what this means? It means the compensation order from the civil proceeding understates the actual harm," she said, "because it was calculated without this agreement. The preferred return structure changes the amount owed. Considerably," Webb said. "How considerably?" He looked at the document, did the calculation she had already done in her head during the ride over. Looked up at her. "Approximately double," she breathed. "Can it be enforced?" she said. "The original agreement is county record," he said. "The addendum is part of that record. Yes, it can be enforced. It will require an additional proceeding, but given that the fraud finding is already established, the evidentiary standard is considerably lower." He paused. "Calloway is going to be very unhappy." "Calloway has been unhappy since October," she said. "File the motion." She walked out of Webb's office into the afternoon and stood for a moment on the street outside. She thought about her father, about the agreement he had signed, careful, deliberate, the way he did everything, protecting his investment with a preferred return clause that should shielded his family from the worst of the collapse. About the fact that Harlow and Calloway had simply not honored it, had pretended it didn't exist, had counted on no one looking closely enough or knowing enough to find it. About the fact that his daughter had found it. She walked to her horse. She rode to find Theodore. He was at the North property when she arrived, in conversation with the new land manager, a careful, competent man named Garrett, whom they had hired together. After an interview process that Evelyn had designed and Theodore had conducted, working in the particular tandem they had developed over the past months. Garrett saw her coming and said something to Theodore, who turned. He saw her face. "Garrett," he said, without looking away from Evelyn. "Give us a moment." Garrett gave them a moment. Evelyn told him what she'd found. Theodore listened without interrupting, the full habit of it now. Not a performance. He listened until she was done, and then he was quiet for exactly the amount of time it took to understand the full shape of it. "Your father protected himself," he said. "He tried to," she said. "He built in a protection and they ignored it. And for 8 years nobody looked for it because nobody knew to look." She met his eyes. "I looked. You always look," he said. "The additional I heard the amount," he said. "Evelyn," he stepped toward her. "Your father protected his family. He did his job. The failure was theirs, not his. And his daughter found the proof of it 8 years later because she is the most thorough person I have ever known." He held her gaze. "Let that be what it is for a moment before we talk about the filing." She looked at him. She let it be what it was. It was a lot. It was 8 years of a story she had told herself incorrectly. The slow understanding that the man she had loved and lost had not failed them, had in fact tried, specifically and deliberately, to protect them, that the protection had been stolen along with everything else. That she had spent 8 years managing the consequences of a theft without knowing the full scope of what had been taken. He would have hated all of this, she said. The hearings. The public record, all of it. He was a private man. Yes, Theodore said. He would have told me to leave it alone, probably. She looked at him. "I'm not leaving it alone." "No," he said, "you're not." He said it the way he said things he meant, simply, without decoration, and he would have been proud of that too, even if he never would have said so. She nodded. She breathed. She pulled herself back to the practical, because that was what she did, because the practical was where she lived, and it had never failed her. "I'll need to review the original partnership terms in full before Webb files. There may be additional provisions no one has examined. Then we'll review them," he said. "It will take time. We have time." She looked at him. Standing in the field with the summer going golden around them, this serious and imperfect and genuinely present man who had learned, slowly and with effort, to ask instead of decide, who left the study door open, who changed the chair, who said, "My sister would have liked you," and meant it as the truest thing he knew how to offer. 2 weeks, she said. He looked at her. The wedding, she said. 2 weeks. Something moved in his face that she had learned. Over these months, was his version of happiness not loud, not demonstrative, but unmistakably real. The expression of him has something to look forward to, and has stopped pretending that doesn't matter. 2 weeks, he said. The morning of the wedding arrived the way the best mornings do, ordinary first, and then extraordinary. The same light through the same windows, the same sounds of the household coming awake, and then the sudden full understanding that this particular morning was different from all the ones before it. Evelyn was up before dawn, old habit. It would probably never leave her entirely. That instinct toward the early hours, toward being prepared before anyone else required her to be. But this morning it was different. This morning she sat at the small desk in her room, the same desk where she had gone over the ledger books by lamplight for 7 years, and she did not open a ledger. She sat with her coffee, without sugar, in the quiet before the house woke up. And she thought about what the day was. She thought about the woman who had folded linen at 4 a.m. before her sister's wedding, who had carried trays for 15 hours and been handed an apron when she should have been given a chair, who had gone home that night and opened a ledger book and calculated, with merciless precision, exactly how many months they had left. 14 months, she had thought that night. She thought about what 14 months had become. Dora knocked at 7. "Miss Evelyn, your sister is here. Send her up." Caroline came in with the particular energy of someone who had been awake too long already and was running on feeling. She had Evelyn's dress over one arm, and her own eyes were red at the edges in the way that meant she had been crying and had made her peace with that. "You're already up," Caroline said. "I'm always already up. Today you could have slept in." "Today especially I couldn't have slept in," Evelyn said. She stood. She looked at her sister. "Are you all right?" "I'm wonderful," Caroline said, and meant it in that complicated way that meant she was also sad and also proud and also carrying something she was working through in real time. I keep thinking about everything." She set the dress down. "I keep thinking about how much I didn't see." "Caroline, I know," Caroline said. "I know you're not asking me to think about it. I want to say it once more and then I'm done." She looked at her sister directly. "You deserved better. For years. And I'm sorry I didn't give it to you." Evelyn looked at her. "I know," she said, "and I'm glad we're here now." Caroline nodded. Straightened. The Hartwell composure, which they had both inherited in different measures and expressed in different ways, reasserted itself. "Let's get you dressed." The ceremony was small and unhurried, the way Evelyn had wanted it. 31 people in the Whitmore parlor, which had been simply and cleanly arranged, no imported ribbons, no elaborate flowers, nothing that required a list of 14 items completed before dawn. Just the people who mattered in a room that was large enough for them. Magistrate Caldwell, who had presided over the hearing and had said afterward, in a rare departure from his professional neutrality, that it had been one of the clearer cases of his career, had agreed to perform the ceremony. Theodore stood at the front of the room. He was wearing the same kind of dark coat he always wore, which Evelyn had expected and found she preferred. She did not want a version of him assembled for the occasion. She wanted the version she knew. She walked in on her own. She had been clear about that. Beatrice had suggested her arm. Caroline had offered. Evelyn had said, with complete pleasantness and complete firmness, that she had been walking on her own for 27 years and intended to continue. She walked to the front of the room. Theodore watched her come. The room was quiet, the way a room gets when something real is happening, and everyone present understands it. She reached him. He looked at her the way he had looked at her the afternoon in the study, when she'd said yes with the full seriousness of a man who understands the weight of what he has been given. "Ready?" "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "I have been," he said, "for longer than I'm going to admit to right now." She almost laughed. She didn't quite. Caldwell began. Afterward, When the ceremony was done, and the small celebrations was winding into the easy warmth of a late October afternoon, Beatrice, talking with Webb about the pending proceeding with an authority that suggested she had been following the case more closely than she'd let on. Caroline and her husband James sitting close together in a way that suggested the year of marriage had done them good. Garrett and Dora somehow both present and somehow both comfortable in the same room. Theodore appeared at Evelyn's elbow. "Come outside," he said. She went with him. They stood on the back porch of the Whitmore estate, her home now. A word she was still getting used to in its new application in the last of the afternoon light. He turned to her. He reached out and straightened the edge of her collar, which did not actually need straightening, and she understood it for what it was, the need to do something with his hands. The particular awkwardness of a man arriving at a moment he had not rehearsed. "I have something I want to say," he said. "Say it," she said. "At your sister's wedding," he said, "I pulled out a chair. And I've thought about that a great deal since then. Why I did it, whether I was helping or simply inserting myself. Whether it was about you or about Eleanor or about some version of myself I was trying to correct." He met her eyes. "I've concluded that it was all three of those things. And I've decided that's all right. The reasons were complicated. The outcome was that you sat down. And everything that has happened since has happened because you sat down and then you stood back up again on your own terms." She looked at him. "Theodore, I'm not finished," he said. She stopped. "You are the most capable person I have ever known," he said. "You are not capable because you had no other choice. I know that's what you were told. What you told yourself. The story that made the work bearable. But it isn't the truth. The truth is that you are capable because it is who you are. It would have been true in any life, under any circumstances." He held her gaze. "And you deserved, in whatever life you had, for someone to see that and say so." She was very still. "I see it," he said. "I'm saying so." There was nothing complicated about what she felt. That was the thing that surprised her, how simple it was. After all the years of calculation, all the careful management of what she let herself feel and when. All the walls built and maintained with such thoroughness, in the end the feeling was just simple. Warm and solid and entirely without conditions. She reached up and took his face in her hands. She kissed him. He kissed her back with the particular quality he brought to everything, completely. Without reservation, entirely present, when she pulled back. He kept his forehead against hers for a moment. "Coffee without sugar," he said quietly. She laughed, fully this time, the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere real. "Yes," she said, "always." The second proceeding concluded the following spring. The additional compensation, calculated from the preferred return agreement her father had signed, and Calzaway's partners had deliberately ignored, was awarded in full. Clarence Webb delivered the document to the Whitmore estate on a Tuesday morning, which Evelyn happened to be at the estate working, because she had not stopped working and had no intention of stopping. She read the document. She signed where Webb indicated. She walked the document to the small fireproof box where she kept the important records, filed it behind the original correction of record, and closed the box. Then she went back to desk and kept working. An hour later, she drove to the county records office and made a donation in her father's name to fund the annual maintenance of the public record archive, the actual physical preservation of the documents, the binding and the storage and the indexing that allowed a daughter, 8 years later, to find a page that changed everything. Peters, the records clerk, accepted the donation with the careful professionalism of a man who understood exactly what it meant without requiring it to be explained. That summer she established a school, not a grand building. Not an institution with a board and a formal charter and her name on a plaque. A room in the Hartwell house which had been fully restored. The debt cleared. The staff properly compensated, where the daughters of tenant farmers and tradespeople could come twice a week and learn account keeping and correspondence and the practical management of household finances. Because someone had taught her once, at a desk on a knee. with patience and without condescension, and because she knew, with the certainty of her own experience, that there was no more powerful thing a woman could have than the ability to understand exactly where she stood. The first student was a girl of 13 named Ruth, the daughter of one of the Whitmore estate's tenant farmers, who arrived on the first Tuesday with her hands clasped in front of her and her jaw set with the particular determination of someone who does not want to appear nervous and therefore appears extremely nervous. Evelyn sat across from her. "Do you know how to read?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Ruth said. "Some good." "That's where we'll start." She opened the ledger she had set on the table between them. "This is an account book. It tells the truth about money, where it comes from. Where it goes, what's left. Most people are afraid of it. They shouldn't be. The numbers are just numbers. What matters is learning to read them." She met the girl's eyes. "I'm going to teach you to read them." Ruth looked at the ledger. Then at Evelyn. The nervousness settled slightly into something that was beginning. "Carefully, yes, ma'am," she said. Evelyn picked up her pen. She began. Theodore appeared in the doorway of the room an hour into the first lesson, carrying 2 cups of coffee, one with sugar, one without, and looked at the scene in front of him. His wife at the table with a 13-year-old girl. Both of them bent over a ledger, Evelyn's voice patient and precise as she explained the relationship between an income column and an expense column and why they had to balance. He set the cups on the small table near the door. He did not interrupt. He watched for a moment, watched his wife teach, watched the girl's face as understanding arrived in it. Watched Evelyn's patience and her certainty and the complete, uncomplicated ease of a woman doing exactly what she was made for. Then he went back to his work. He left the door open. He always left the door open. And in the room where Evelyn Hartwell Whitmore sat across from a girl who needed to know the truth about numbers, the ledger lay open between them, and the accounts were clear. And the columns balanced, every outgoing matched against every incoming, every cost accounted for, every debt settled. The woman who had once carried trays at her sister's wedding had finally taken her seat. And she had taken it on her own terms in her own time, and no one, not ever again, would ask her to give it up.